very few things that are universal to all human beings, and monsters are actually one of them. They are with us from our earliest memories in the folk stories we hear. They've been with our ancestors from thousands of years ago in their cave paintings about the giant creature that was coming to kill us.
Monsters and fantasy creatures have lived with us throughout all of our lives. They're not just for nerds, and they're not just for geeks and game players and movie audiences. I mean, it's the archetype of the villain in any kind of a story, any kind of a morality tale, and they've been around us since we've been kids.
If you go back to the Bible, and Lucifer as the snake in the tree is the embodiment of all that is unknown and evil. And even prior to Christianity, every culture and religion has had their dark force and their evil entity, and it's a way of helping us understand how the world works.
They tap into a deep-seated fear of the unknown. And with films, unlike with a cave painting or a book, it takes a team of craftsmen, of artisans, to help bring those monsters to life.
One of the reasons I do what I do is because I saw Frankenstein on TV as a kid. I was fascinated, first of all, by the look of the character, but also that whole concept of creating life.
It's kind of godlike to create something that never existed before, to take raw elements and your own imagination and breathe life into something. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but that feeling that you get when it comes out of the womb of your mind, I now know why Dr. Frankenstein went crazy when he said, it's alive, because that feeling, there's nothing else like it in the world.
Put your heart and soul in all of them, even the little low-budget ones. They all mean something to you. I mean, it's great if they become Jurassic Park or the Terminator series or Avatar, but each and every one of them is really important.
Every step of the way, it is like raising a child. When it's little, you have to nurture it, and then as it gets a little bit older, it starts taking on a life of its own, to the point where it becomes something that maybe even at times you hadn't expected it to become.
The very first emotional reaction that I have to that creation is when it moves for the first time. You feel that rush of it is alive, it's moving, it's doing what we wanted it to do. Our creature lives.
Le monstre est en fait un miroir sur lequel on projette un certain nombre de sensations, de sentiments, d'émotions qui sont la plupart du temps refoulées. Un monstre sans émotion, pour moi, ça ne fonctionne pas. Le créateur de monstres qui m'a le plus impressionné, c'est Rob Bottin, et notamment le Diable de légende. Très consciemment, il franchit le pas et il dit « Le monstre est en fait supérieur à l'homme, le monstre est un homme en mieux. » En plus fort, en plus puissant et sans doute en plus beau. Mais comme il est unique, il est monstre.
I find the most terrifying characters to be the ones that are almost human but don't obey our rules. Those are the most frightening ones because we can see so much of ourselves in them. And then we're forced to recognize not their inhumanity, but their otherness in a sense.
Anytime we get a chance to do a full-on character that goes through a range of emotions like sadness or, surprise or joy, that's a real character, and we're always grateful for that opportunity.
Some people say we don't do realistic stuff, we do characters or cartoony stuff. But I'm just reminded as we work with clients, they'll say they want an alligator or they want a dinosaur. And then we'll do a realistic interpretation. Then they say, well, can you make him meaner? Can you make his eyes bigger? And well, that's making it a character. So now you're broadening some of the characteristics of these animals, and it's more of a caricature. That's what we do. We bring character to these things.
To me, a creature is successful when it has attributes that I can emotionally connect to, that I obviously that I believe in, that I care about. I may hate the creature, I may envy the creature, I may feel love for the creature while watching that movie.
We don't respond to monsters intellectually. I mean, monsters are all about, and getting terrified or fascinated or whatever it is. So it has to be that thing that has that element of connection immediately. It has to be very quick when you see it. If it doesn't have that, then yeah, it could be a fascinating creature, beautiful work, but that's not what a great creature is to me. A great creature has the emotional response designed into it.
You've got to know what kind of emotion you want to evoke from the audience. It's really kind of difficult, and I think a lot of times what a character does, their action, also defines them a little bit more than their physicality.
For designing a creature, the first steps of reading a script are very important.
When I sit down to write a screenplay like RoboCop or Starship Troopers, and it's got monsters in it and stuff like that, what you realize is that you have to give some information that is compelling information to the reader. It tells them enough about what it does, the monster, but doesn't kind of tell them too much or doesn't insist too much on what it is. It really has to function in the narrative. And then the real trick is you got to work with really good people. You should allow room for their imagination. That's the most important thing. You hope you'll get something that's better than you can think of.
The way you cast a movie with designers is the same way you cast with actors. Is this actor comedic? Is this actor good at drama? The first step is good casting.
You look at the script and have discussions with the director, and then the next move is to start visualizing the director's ideas and in the context of the script.
You try to have a storytelling in the monster. Ray Harryhausen used to say that a good monster needs to be imagined in repose. Not just attacking, not being bad, because he used to say, a lion is beautiful when he's resting, but if the lion is on top of you and about to bite you, it's terrifying. So a monster has to have that duality, if possible. It has to have an element of majesty or beauty.
And the easiest and quickest way to get that idea across, to develop it, is through drawings. That's where my brother Charlie steps in. He could do a number of drawings, variations.
If I see it in my head, I can draw it, and that's the fun part of it. And then trying to work with, directors and producers and trying to get out of their mind what they're seeing.
You never design a monster to be a monster. You design a monster to be a character. The moment you see that monster, you know what it does. You know the essence of its personality.
The more you put into it, the more life it gets. And as an artist, that was satisfying to a point. And that's why we got into filmmaking. We wanted to bring the artwork to life. I always look at it as a man, as a male. This is the closest thing that I can do to giving birth. You can be whimsical and crazy with the characterization, but unless you put anatomy that grounds it in reality, it will only be a cartoony fantasy kind of thing. It's if you start incorporating the physical anatomy of real animals and your audience says, you know what, this thing could exist, it makes it much more real.
In design, I look for things that rhyme, that a line here is echoed on a line over here, that the eyes are positioned so that you can give them intent. For example, the eyes on a creature, you need the creature to look intelligent when it looks down or look evil when it looks up. It's almost like making up or dressing an actor.
It's partly trying to not get lost in practicalities when designing a creature that is pure fantasy. Dragons breathe fire, fair enough, that's what they do. Do we need to break it down scientifically and try and visibly explain how they do it? I think not. It would be like doing a film on Greek myth where you were preoccupied by how centaurs feed themselves. I think it's an easy trap to fall into. So we simply take some things as givens because they are part of a mythological setting.
So common technique is two-dimensional drawings of the character, and a preferred technique for me is to actually use a three-dimensional maquette that gives you a little bit more of a feeling for what the character could be as a three-dimensional character in movement.
We like to think of maquettes as sketches, as a clay sketch, like you would do a pencil sketch. But you can quickly throw down some shapes, and it's much more informative than a drawing or even a computer rendering. So we love traditional sculpture, and it's very quick.
When I start a sculpture, basically, you know, a small bust like this, I'm really not too concerned with any details or form. You want to start off with just the very biggest forms by getting the shoulders and the block of the body in. You know, that's the first stage, is to just get the feeling of the body that I want. As I'm working, you know, and just getting in general proportions, I see little things, little forms that start to happen in the clay, and you can follow that. The clay talks. It sort of tells you what you can do.
We grab that whole sculpture without color and we put it under a desk lamp, and then we move the desk lamp all around it. I see that every single angle works. And then you start with color. Like in any other thing, you use the color as composition. And then what you do is you take the creature and you decide on its environment, and that's part of the creature design. People think that the creature, just designed the creature and they put it in the movie. That's not true. The movie needs to exist in a light and shadow and color and light pattern that allows the creature to live there. The xenomorph in Alien works in the planet and in the ship. But if you put the xenomorph in the middle of Wall Street, it doesn't look good. It doesn't work.
After you've broken down the script, done your sketches, done your designs, done your maquettes, basically once you've done the fun part, the true art, the design, now you got to get down to the real world and roll around in the dirt and figure out how you're going to actually make this thing come to life and put it up on the screen. And, I mean, the choices are endless, depending on what you're creating. I mean, a lot of times, one of the easiest ways is to do a prosthetic makeup on an actor. The term special makeup effects was coined probably in the late 70s, early 80s, because before it was either makeup or it was special effects. Special effects blowing up, making it rain, makeup was putting powder on somebody's face. We had nothing to call it. So suddenly it's a special makeup effect.
I was one of the first people to start to use the credit special makeup effects, and it was because it wasn't just normal makeup. You know, we wanted to separate ourselves from that. It's hard to put a definition on it, you know. I just see it as the evolution of makeup.
You take an actor and you actually alter his or her face by taking a life cast first, a mold of the actor's face, then you alter it with clay by sculpting it, make a mold of that, and duplicate the prosthetic piece, the appliance, in a material like silicone, gelatin, or foam rubber. Then you apply it to the actor's face and you got your special prosthetic makeup effect.
We use latex and aluminum and all kinds of things, and we have something that we created with our own hands, you know.
It all goes back to two people. Lon Chaney Sr. first, silent movie star, the man of 1,000 faces. He was an actor. He had nobody to turn him into these characters, so he just figured out how to do it to himself. The Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Mr. Wu, all of these things. The Man Who Laughs, unbelievable makeups. No one had ever seen anything like that. certainly at that time, and even still to this day, because Chaney did some pretty amazing things without necessarily just building up. He even figured out ways to detract from his face by pulling his eyes, by stretching his mouth, all kinds of, I mean, anything he could do. He wasn't limited because he didn't learn it from anyone, he taught himself. And then, of course, Jack Pierce, Frankenstein monster, the werewolf. Jack Pierce did iconic images that still stand today. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a makeup that is as iconic as the Frankenstein monster, the first film on Boris Karloff. It's the reigning king of creature makeups, and it's so simple. The brow can't be more than a quarter inch thick at its thickest, and then the headpiece right up here, and the wig, I mean, it's genius is what it is, because it's just the right amount of makeup on the right actor to create something that is branded into the collective consciousness of mankind forever.
Karloff, as the creature of Frankenstein, has already that beautiful bone structure that Boris had, and he had the capacity of doing the glassy, dead eyes. I think the actor, part of their structure and their physique and their essence is vital to the monster. I mean, Ron Perlman, when we started Hellboy, I knew it was going to be Ron, but I thought it was going to be the voice of Ron and maybe an animatronic. And Rick Baker says, why? He's already 50% there. And sure enough, Ron was perfect underneath the makeup. We did the test and it was perfect.
I think that's one of the things that has to happen is the actor's performance and the makeup artist, you know, they work together and they have to complement each other for it to really work.
I loved watching the Universal monster movies, and I always felt like those creatures were an extension of Jack Pierce. You watch The Wolfman, and you know Lon Chaney's in there, but it feels like a different character. You know, same with Frankenstein.
Certainly Lon Chaney was one of the masters. Jack Pierce was one of the masters. Those were the guys that pioneered. But that certainly gave way to probably one of the most important makeup artists of the modern era, who I think was Dick Smith.
He is the grandfather of the modern era of makeup effects. And aside from being a great artist himself, he was very giving of all of his secrets. He didn't have secrets. He was a guy who believed that quality came from the hand of the artist, not the kind of paint that he used or the technique in particular. He developed techniques and he gave them away.
And of course Dick Smith did The Exorcist. I mean, that movie changed everything in a lot of different ways. And I mean, think about that for just a minute. A cherubic face young child, I don't remember how old she was, maybe 12 in the film, to turn her into such a horrific image. I mean, the juxtaposition of innocence with absolute horror. Dick actually invented techniques on that. The contact lenses, nobody had been using contact lenses back then, so to change this girl's eyes, so effective.
I think one of the things that makeup effects artists and creature designers are trying to do over and over again is get away from the human anatomy. By extending the arms, by extending the head, you know, there's a lot that can be done with prosthetics, but ultimately your canvas, your base, is still the human body.
The real trick with men in suits, rubber monsters who are performed that way, is hiding the human form within. And you've seen all kinds of attempts to make that happen. I think one of the designs that turned that notion on its head and embraced the human anatomy, yet still worked beautifully, was Predator. I think it's one of the greatest creature suits ever designed. My father and his team at Stan Winston Studio nailed it. The dimensions are purely human. There are no arm extensions or leg extensions. This allowed the performer to be very dynamic, get a great performance, but the head took it away from human. You know, mandibles, not something you often see on a person. But again, stuck with the actor's eyes so that you had a dynamic, in-the-moment performance.
When you see a movie like Alien and you see the extent that they distorted the performer's body by elongating the head, by adding all those little protrusions onto his back, and how it was filmed, you were able to very, very successfully implant in the audience's mind that this is something alien, that it is not something human.
This whole thing is too hard.
we're very performance oriented. I'm physically in the suits of most of the creatures we build. I've been the alien in the last 4 Alien movies. I've been a gorilla in 2 or 3 movies, a bunch of TV shows. Everything that around here that has 2 arms and 2 legs, chances are I've been inside the thing. So I'm in there, and initially it was because I fit the suits and I had the endurance and I was willing to take that last step physically to make everything look great.
Tom, when you don't move your hips around much, the tail hangs to one side or the other. So I think you need to constantly be aware that you have to keep it moving and swishing it to get it to go. It's still favoring your left. Put your hands on the dome, like you're stroking it. Remember, like that Giger thing? Little further up. And just like interlock the fingers. Yeah, that's cool. Stroke it all the way up the dome.
These creatures that we build and create, they happen on set in front of a camera because of the way we're performing. With me inside, with Alec on the outside, puppeteering or directing the entire group of puppeteers to bring a performance out of it. It's not just movement, it's not just making a big monster creature that can move. It's no different from acting, except it's more technically challenging. We made this suit animatronic upper arms and head and face and lip syncing and way over the top. And it's here to remind me to never do it again because I was in the suit, 120 pounds, no fresh air, no vision. We would run air tubes inside, run a water tube up inside so I'd get a drink because once I went inside, I'd be locked in for several hours at a time. So basically, I lived through my crotch during those hours.
The Japanese did wonderful things with men in suit technique. Godzilla was a big landmark for me as well. Part of the charm of the man in a suit technique is the fact that you could see that there was a man in the suit. The way he moved, you can kind of sense there was a guy inside. And what was really great about them, though the performance might not have been as specific a performance, what they did do was they interacted with the scenery around them. You had Godzilla, Rodan, and Ghidorah, all these creatures smashing the buildings, walking through the buildings, and the tactile reality of having them mess up all the surrounding area was really unique to that technique. It was kind of a pseudo-reality that you were able to get involved in. It was, for us, watching it as young kids, it made us emulate that technique because it was something that we could do quite easily, make our own costumes and make our own little monster movies.
1, 2, 3, now!
Ah, that'd be much better.
Action! 1, 2, 3, now!
Clearly, Godzilla is the king of the monsters. The design might be outrageous. It might clearly be a guy in the suit. It's still going to be effective, though, because even though it's not real, it's really there. And that's important. It taps into your own memories of pretending to be a monster in your bedroom as a kid and bashing things. You know, the fun of stuff breaking. And audiences can feel that, and they love it. You can touch it. You can feel it on camera. This is garbage bags and foam. How fun is that?
As a child, watching Godzilla destroy Tokyo would have been pretty horrifying, especially in the black and white documentary style that they shot it in. But there was something about it that was kind of engaging, kind of safe zone, that it looked like a man in a suit.
With makeup effects and costumes, there are certain limitations that are a result of being tied to the human body. For the character, and stop motion animation, it really allows you to make characters that a human could not fit into. Stop motion is a technique that was used obviously in the pre-digital age because there was no other way of creating a phantasmagorical character that couldn't be a man in a costume or a cable-controlled puppet of some sort. And there's absolutely no way that a human being could fit into this. This is the Ed 209 stop-motion puppet from RoboCop. He's constructed with an aluminum and steel armature, which allows us to hold a pose incrementally over shooting multiple frames. When projected back at 24 frames a second, gives the illusion of movement. The technique had been used from 1925 all the way up to Jurassic Park.
Put down your
weapon. Those of us that got involved with doing stop motion animation were inspired by the work of Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen. And Willis O'Brien was one of the primary creators of stop motion animation, starting back in a little bit after the turn of the century. And he was the guy that was able to visualize or marry the possibility of shooting a single frame of film at a time and then incrementally repositioning a model that's usually covered with rubber that has an articulated skeleton that we call an armature. His masterpiece was really the 1933 King Kong, of which this is a reproduction of the articulated skeleton. Then in 1949, he took on Ray Harryhausen as his student and mentored Ray Harryhausen, who did a significant amount of the animation for Mighty Joe Young with these articulated armature skeletons. Ray Harryhausen, after Mighty Joe Young, made quite a number of films. The one that really inspired me was in 1958, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
The model, I think, for animation is always going to be Harryhausen. He created actors, not monsters, and that's the highest praise you can give a monster creator, is that they become characters.
The process of stop motion animation to a lot of people seems kind of tedious, kind of monotonous, but it's really not. Your mind is filled with 1,000 decisions that have to be made while you're doing this, essentially a performance. And it really is a performance going through your body into the puppet. And it's amazing. I mean, you've seen puppeteers do puppets, and you can see that there. They translate the movement to a live performance that's really compelling.
Kick back, put it hand up. Push your hand up a little further, Jim.
Hand up. Oh.
Yeah, great.
Marionettes do the same thing. In a weird way, in a weird time-lapse way, a stop-motion animator is the actor. And he's translating his performance like 1/24th of a second at a time. It's really cool.
And you're actually doing a performance with a complete three-dimensional object in, real space, with real light on it. Not necessarily in real time, but you have to adjust your perception of time, so it will be ultimately compressed into the kind of performance that you're looking for.
Deep down inside, people probably know it's a miniature. They know it's a small, inanimate object. But the fact that it comes to life on the screen, that's magic.
But there are instances where what they need is another full-scale prop. For RoboCop 2, we had two different scales of cane puppet. This is the stop-motion puppet that was used, shot one frame at a time, for the acting and the ambulatory scenes. But there was a requirement that needed interaction with Peter Weller when he's fighting with the creature. So there was live-action Peter Weller that would not fit with the scale puppet. So what we did was build a full-scale cane prop that Peter Weller interacted with.
The most important thing is to make these effects real and believable, and that comes from having them interact with actors on set in front of the camera. And to do that, we will now be able to bring on a full-scale animatronic creature, and we can animate it and bring it to life and give it motion and some kind of touching, feeling kind of interaction. It's very physical and very real because it's actually happening right there for the cameras.
This gorilla is one that we built for the movie Zookeeper. It was a talking gorilla, so it had to be able to emote and be a character that had to interact in a comedic fashion. It has 35 servo motors in it, and 16 of the motors are in the lips and mouth alone. So he can go from looking very sympathetic to very angry.
That's what animatronics is to design a system that allows elements of a character to move realistically without a person's face behind it. You know, it's all done with servo motors, linear actuators, electronics, advanced systems to create natural movement.
Actually, the word animatronics is animation through electronics, and it was originally came about, I think, during the time of Disney's building his theme park, and he was using something called audio animatronics because they were controlled by an audio, tape machine. But animatronics for us is just anything where we can bring life and performance to it in a controlled way through electronics. It can be done as something as big as the Queen Alien from Aliens and Alien versus Predator. We had a whole computerized armature, a mechanized, hydraulically powered Queen Alien that could squat down and just by operating controls, suddenly stand 14 feet tall and spin her head around and come right down to a person and open her jaw, and the little jaw would come out. And it was like, honestly, it was one of the coolest toys I think we've ever played with.
Stand by and up!
You could just sit there, 8 of us, puppeteers with little joysticks, and whatever you would do, the Queen would do, and you could record the moments, and we get the marks down. We got a lot of use out of her on set.
Of course, as animatronics designers, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Literally, one of the first giant puppets ever created for film was Georges Méliès' Conquest of the Pole, an incredible giant ice creature that was manually controlled. He, of course, didn't have the sophistication of the hydraulics and motion control computers that we have today, but the scale of it was just absolutely spectacular for its time.
Historically, for movies, the techniques that were used were usually defined by the script. Like a Frankenstein monster lent itself very well to be Boris Karloff with a Jack Pierce makeup. King Kong and the dinosaurs really needed to have the gravitas of the kind of things that they were. So stop motion was the best technique. And then in 1977, George Lucas got Star Wars going, and in George's universe, it was proliferated with all sorts of different kinds of characters and creatures that required a combination of every different kind of effect: stop motion, makeup, cable controlled things.
I worked a lot with George Lucas on the original Star Wars films. Primarily, the way it works is that George sort of has the idea for it, and he doesn't, at the time, didn't really care how any of the work was done. And we've sort of come up with, a different approach.
What's sitting here before you kind of represents pretty big range. For the original Star Wars, the cantina were all masks that we wore. They were very, very, very simplified masks that didn't have a great deal of articulation.
Stuart Freeborn did the cantina scene originally in the English shooting, and George Lucas showed me on the flatbed editor the cantina scene as it was. And I was so excited. I just thought it was such a cool idea to have this bar in space with all these aliens in it. And he said, I want to add to it, but there was no money. As far as Fox was concerned, the film was shot. And nobody knew Star Wars was going to be Star Wars. Nobody knew the reaction that it was going to cause. But I couldn't pass up this opportunity. I had to do this film. So we found a little workshop we could put the guys in for Star Wars. And I did some sketches, and they had some great sketches that Ron Cobb did. And George picked some of mine and some of the Ron Cobb ones, and we started making these aliens.
The cantina scene is a weird centerpiece showcase, because George Lucas brings you into a world full of tactile people. George Lucas was a fan of monster movies and serials growing up. So for him, it was like, yeah, we're on an alien world. Let's go nuts. Let's not just make people look like Klingons. Let's make them look like this guy. It looks like a walrus. This guy looks like a big furry thing. This dude's going to get his arm cut off. Nobody looks human except the people coming into the bar.
You got the cantina scenes with the devil in there. And
a werewolf.
And a werewolf. You just like, oh my God, an alien like that or like this. It just textures it.
Admiral Akbar was more of a sophisticated mask that had a lot of cable control movements, so his eyes could move around. There were lip controls that controlled him. There was also a double that was like a hand puppet, so we could get more articulation out of his mouth. The chess set was all done with traditional stop motion animation with little puppets about this big.
I love stop motion. I said, let's try to do the Walker sequence stop motion because we can get it done in the time frame. We know it'll look good. We can control everything. And I knew stop motion animators, Phil Tippett and John Berg and other guys who could do the work and build the puppets and everything and do a great job.
75% of the Walker scenes were all paintings with model floors, you know, really simple, really elegant, you know.
Just like they had done at King Kong.
Yeah.
That was really part of the idea. And you'd walk in and look at the set and say, my God, this is like they did King Kong. Other stuff that like George would do, you know, he had, you know, the big Jabba sequence and all the stuff in the palace and Jedi. Based on the technology, the only way you can do it is, you know, rubber puppets with armatures inside or rod puppets.
The Rancor pit monster was a character about 3 times this size that I put my hand up into and we shot as a high-speed puppet. I had always imagined it as a stop-motion puppet, and we tried, George really wanted us to try to do a man-in-a-suit Godzilla kind of a thing, and it just didn't look good, so George said, okay, go for it, do what you want, but by that point in time, there was not the time to do it as a stop-motion puppet. So it was Dennis Muren's idea to do it as a high-speed miniature.
For Return of the Jedi, George wanted a new array of aliens. Phil Tippett, who brought me in on it and said, just, you know, do some sculptures, do some quick maquettes and stuff. George likes to see the stuff in 3D. And you just do whatever you want, because it's probably all going to change 10 times over before we get into production. So I was, okay, you did a bunch of stuff. And George came in and said, that one, all of them, that's good. So kind of surprised the heck out of us. And suddenly every production in town wanted rubber aliens in their movies. And there weren't a lot of people in Hollywood doing that at the time.
And so suddenly from that point forward, man, like rubber monsters were sexy. There's a period where people were like, those are 50s movies. And then they became the real deal. So prosthetics kind of worked their way out from the late 70s going into the 80s. All that traces back to Star Wars.
The beginning of the 1980s was really a big change in makeup effects because of 2 movies, The Howling and An American Werewolf in London. In the old Universal Wolfman movies, basically you would have the actor still in one position, and you'd roll the film, you'd stop the camera, then you'd add some hair to his face, you'd roll the camera, and then you'd stop it again, you'd add the nose, you'd add the teeth, you'd do whatever, and it was one lap dissolve over another that would gradually bring you from human to werewolf. But in The Howling and in An American Werewolf in London, everything changed.
I wrote American Werewolf in London in 1969. The conception that was in the screenplay, it was that the transformation, the metamorphosis from man to wolf, 1 was very painful, and 2, I wanted to show it in bright light, which is unforgiving and a terrible thing to do to an effects guy. I gave that script to Rick Baker when I was 21 and he was 20 when we made Schlock, and I said, figure this out.
And it was like exciting and terrifying at the same time because I had no idea how I would do it. But it was like, well, wait a minute, now we actually, if we do a head, we can do things that we can't do on a person. You know, having a person inside is very limiting. But if it's a fake head, you can have a whole mechanism inside. So, you know, Change Your Head idea was born.
10 years later, when I finally was able to get the money, I called Rick. I said, hooray! You know, we got the money. And Rick said, I'm kind of doing a werewolf movie. And I said, what? And he told me that he was just hired by Joe to do a movie called The Howling.
Well, I knew that John had been working on a werewolf movie, and I knew that he had asked Rick to do one, but I had never heard anything come of it.
And I went nuts. I was hysterical. I was like, how, you didn't show him the Change-O heads, did you? Because Rick, he went, well, yeah. So I got hysterical. And Rick, actually, his assistant, on The Howling was the very brilliant Rob Bottin, who took over and did The Howling with Joe, and then Rick came and did Werewolf with me.
Ironically, I worked as Rob Bottin's assistant on The Howling, and then directly from that film, I worked as Rick Baker's assistant on American Werewolf. If I could say anything to the new people out there these days, it's just strive to be the best. And this I learned from Rob Bottin. One night, we were working together when we were sculpting the final tall werewolf, and Rob would sculpt one side and he would task me with matching him, so it would get done twice as fast. So Rob would do the designing on one side and I'd sit there and have to keep up and go, oh my God, I'm not good enough, look what he's doing, this is genius, genius, genius. Threw one away, started another. I'm like, why'd you do that? So I can do better. He threw that away and started another. And it's the most amazing werewolf I've ever seen in my life. And he comes toward me with a sledgehammer and goes, bam, bam. Rob, you've already destroyed 2 werewolves. Why did you do this? And he just kind of sets his cocktail on a shelf and he goes, because I can do better.
This is the number 2 Change-O head. And what's unique about this one, it's 2 different faces, basically. This side is more human and more in pain. This side is more like the wolf and more evil. But when it came time to shoot the Change-O heads, you know, John would say action, and we'd make the head change. And
I said, okay, cut. Great. And Rick went, what do you mean great? I said, great. Go. Next.
You know, we worked for months on this, you know? It's like, and that's all you're going to do? And then John would say,
does it do anything else?
It was disappointing at the time, but we got the payback when we saw the film.
So all Rick Baker has to figure out how to do is make somebody's a head, you know, mold of somebody, David Naughton, make his mouth become a wolf mouth. Let John Landis shoot that, and everybody's imagination is insanely captured because now you're taking rubber to the next level.
I think I was too enamored of Rick's work. I thought it was so cool that in the movie I show way too much of the wolf and way too much. You know, if I made that movie now, I don't think I'd show it as clearly as I did in the movie I did.
We made the same mistake. Once the distributors saw the rough assembly of this, said, don't change a frame. And it was like, what? It's 2 minutes long. It's too long. You know, no. We're going to show it to the exhibitors. So they showed it to the exhibitors. And they go, oh, they all want to book the movie now. And it's like, you can't change it. And it was like, this is too long. She's standing there. This woman has got a werewolf changing in front of her. She doesn't run away.
An American Werewolf in London and The Howling started an entirely new approach and a new kind of makeup effects and a new kind of people who wanted to come into it. In John Carpenter's The Thing, Rob Bottin took those makeup effects to extraordinary highs. Nobody had ever done anything to that extent.
You're working with Rob Bottin on The Thing, also very extensive transformation type of effects and other sorts of makeup effects. Is it more of a pain in the neck, or do you really enjoy the process?
Well, unlike John, we have set aside about 5 months to shoot all the effects, separate and apart from the first unit.
Well, you have much more extensive than I did.
They go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. They are a pain in the neck if you try to do them in your first unit. If you're trying to do them all at the same time, like if I had a 10-week schedule and it took a week to do the transformations, I would be out of my mind.
It was the last week. We had shot in fact, we'd shot all the inserts, so we had nothing to do. I was going to say, I read the screenplay by Bill Lancaster of John's movie, and
The
Thing, and it's just, talk about demand. It's unbelievable what is supposed to happen in the film. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see it. It's just it's mind-boggling.
I love John Carpenter's The Thing, and it's funny because, and speaking of Rob Bottin, the work was great.
Worked great out for him on The Howling. Rob Bottin became a superstar, so then he gets his opportunity on The Thing, and I kind of think that it turned him into a monster. He's like, wait a minute. If I can make a human turn into a werewolf, I'll make spider legs grow out, and I'll have his chest rip open and turn into teeth, and I'll have anything imaginable. I'll have a big alligator head grow out of it because it's possible now. Rob was high on the creative process, and he's such a creative person that he just would not stop. That team, I heard, worked 24 hours a day, creating stuff that, goddammit, to this day has not been matched.
If you look at movies that happened prior to that, there was one monster in the film, and you would build your entire movie around that. What Rob did, and John Carpenter, was that they took 8 or 9 big set-piece moments and created characters, creature characters for each one. And not only did you get to see each one, but you got to see them be formed and created.
Even today, it still is astounding, visually astounding, and it's not just the creature effects. It wasn't just Rob Bottin. He was a genius with what he brought visually, but Carpenter also created an environment that made all of that stuff live and breathe and work and impact you on an emotional level. So it's a difficult movie to ever get out of the shadow of, because it's the epiphany. It's like probably one of the most perfect creature effects films that have ever been made.
Normally, when we operate a head like this, we split up the functions. Sometimes we have 1 or 2 people operating just the head, and then other people operate the body and other functions on the character. The reason for that is because it's easier, for example, for me to focus only on the eyes, only on the performance of the eyes, to make sure they're looking where they need to look, blink the right way. If I'm operating the eyes and the mouth and everything else, it's a little more confusing. It's a little more difficult to do it just with one person. So we split up the duties, and that way 2 or 3 of us can deliver a much better performance than just one person trying to do it all by themselves.
One of the things people don't understand is when you see a puppet on screen and his face is all moving and his arms are moving and everything else, that's not one person operating. It's one character, but it can be 3, 5, 12 people operating this one character. So those 12 people have to work in unison to create the performance of this creature.
The sophisticated animatronics that we have, or at least had, are dependent on a lot of different people pulling like a team, like a military operation almost, to try to get the puppets to have a personality and to make expressions that can be read by the audience as, sad or happy or angry or whatever. And it doesn't work if one person's off and the eyebrow goes down this way and the other one goes up this way. Well, you can't use that.
Okay, Chris, start dying. Agony. Okay, head down. It's getting to be too much. Start twitching. Okay, die.
Gremlins. First off, I should say Gremlins was the most trying project of my entire life. Almost killed me. To be quite honest, I didn't know how to make the movie. We went into it, and Joe Dante initially thought, well, maybe the Mogwai will be monkeys dressed in costumes. And
We got a rhesus monkey and put a gremlin head on it and put it in a costume, and it went crazy and ran all over the editing room and shit all over everything. We realized that wasn't going to be the way we were going to do our gremlins.
So the puppets were the way to go, but at that particular point in film history, there weren't a lot of animatronics developed at all. There were a number of approaches for the gremlins, the larger puppets. We had our own little code dialogue for everything. Dummy puppets were puppets that basically the mouth open and closed, and that was it. Simple puppets had the mouth open and closed, the brow went up and down, and the ears went up and down to give it motion. And then there were very, very elaborate puppets. What we called a super gremlin, and that had 64 cables coming out of it. And I remember at the end of the picture just thinking to myself, oh my God, if I could pull this movie off, I could do anything. I didn't worry about making rubber monsters after Gremlins.
After films like Gremlins and E.T., I think directors wanted to direct something live. They didn't want to rely on a post-production technique. So then we got involved with animatronics and puppets and costumes. We did the Critter movies. We did all 4 Critter films for New Line Cinema.
Basically, it's a puppeteer's hand up his ass and doing that. I can't get in there now and open it up because it's kind of rotten and stuck together. Very low tech.
This was like the medium-sized Critter. And it was a hand puppet, a big hand puppet. And in those days, we didn't have radio-controlled RC motors in the head. So it was all cable-operated, bicycle cables, pulling all of the pull points in the mouth and the cheeks and the snarls and the eye blinks and all of that. It's very archaic, but very much fun. A lot of hands-on. He's too crispy to move. I mean, the foam doesn't last very long, and as you can see, he's not the Critter he used to be. He's a mere shell of his former self.
The Kyoto's puppets for Critters, you know, they had a fraction of the money to do what Gremlins did.
It turned out, luckily, that Gremlins was the right movie at the right time. It made a lot of money. It was a huge success, astounding Warner Brothers, who expected it to be a flop. And
I think it was their most profitable movie, wasn't it?
It was that and Ghostbusters, I think, were the biggest movies that year.
For Gremlins, Chris Walas's guys were doing really complicated puppets, and everybody was trying to one-up the next. With Slimer and Ghostbusters, I didn't feel like that technique made sense. I'd read the script, obviously, and the movie's really funny, so I thought, what's my reference? What Tex Avery cartoons? When a character smiles in a Tex Avery cartoon, they don't just do it like this. Their whole face deforms. I mean, the cheeks come up to here. The head will flatten down. The eyes will pop. This happens. I mean, they just go nuts. I mean, in ways that you could never, ever do in a standard mechanizing process. And so I thought, well, the only way to muscle around this much foam rubber is to do it literally by hand. Ghostbusters was challenging, but I have to say The Abyss was by far the most difficult project I've ever tackled, because James Cameron asked for something that was virtually impossible. He called me up and he said, I want you to create the most beautiful, ethereal image ever put on film. They've got to work underwater. They've got to be glass clear. They've got to self-illuminate and change colors. So I said, yes, I'll do it. Shook hands, went into the studio, got my team working on it. And you got to remember, this is the early 80s, the heyday of this stuff. And we were all kids. We were all in our early 20s. We didn't know how to do anything.
So we need to really get this background thing together and then see if we can actually get some real movement in it. The optics look better in it. If we can get the arms, if we have arms in the first place on it, that would be nice. And, the arms are wonderful. Why are you taping? This is a miserable thing to tape, Bob. If we have arms on it, then we'll see what the arms do.
This makes a good thing when we have the triumphant scene later.
Finally, we find something that maintains its clarity a little bit for a few days, but if it's clear, it doesn't self-illuminate. If we find something that's clear and self-illuminates, it doesn't work underwater. If it works underwater and self-illuminates, it's not clear. It's like every possible ad infinitum thing to make this not work.
Jim Cameron knows exactly what he wants, open to ideas, certainly, but knows really what he wants from the first frame to the last frame of every single shot. How big it is in the frame, how fast it gets from here to here.
James, as we all know, was a very difficult taskmaster, but he also brings out the best in people. You know, I know he didn't come to us and ask us to do something that he knew would crash and burn. I think he always had a way out and knew that it was possible if he cracked the whip hard enough. So finally, we decided to use fiber optics, and it worked.
Jim Cameron came up with this sequence for The Abyss that was supposedly like a water snake, this giant, like, creature that was made out of water that was sort of like a probe. He didn't quite know really how to do it, but he had some ideas. He talked to Phil Tippett about doing it out of clay.
He wanted to shoot like at 500 frames a second, people throwing a bucket of water up in the air, so it'd be a super slow motion. And then he wanted me to get like white clay and kind of roto the clay for like all the little...
That was the original idea?
Yeah.
Wild, man.
And it was like, you know.
I'm getting to hear this for the first time.
You are batshit crazy, dude.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I got, you know, two things to tell you. You know, it's like, one, write out of your script, or two, you know, see if you get lucky and go talk to Dennis Muren at ILM.
One of the ideas he was going to try was computer graphic work. We did a test. We stayed up all night and did it. Jim Cameron thought it was really great, and we got the job.
And that was 18 scenes, 72 seconds. Took us about a year. We had 2 machines.
James Cameron, he told me something that I've always remembered. He said, listen, in every film, you gotta give the audience something. One thing that they cannot get out of their head. They walk out of the theater and they can't stop talking about it. In The Abyss, it was the water tentacle, which completely eclipsed my work. Everybody on the special effects team got an Oscar except for me because of that goddamn water tentacle.
So, you know, it just seemed like this was going to take off, but it wasn't until really Jim came along with T2 that really things went crazy with, you know, in the CG world.
In The Abyss, we could have taken the sequence out and Jim would have had a movie. But in Terminator, he couldn't take the T-1000 out. It obviously was a main character in the movie, and so it was through the experience in The Abyss that gave Jim the confidence that it could actually be done.
Terminator 2 was the seminal film that launched CGI and what it was capable of. What most audiences don't know is that it was also an equally groundbreaking practical effects film. The majority of the shots in that film were actually handled with practical effects.
Terminator 2 was probably the hardest movie I've ever worked on in my life. People don't realize how much that we did in that movie. One of the most famous shots in that movie that I'm so proud of is when the T-1000 is frozen and he blows apart. There is not one bit of CG in that, but everyone assumes that's a great CG shot.
Whenever you saw the liquid metal man getting damaged, that was a puppet. When you saw it healing itself, that was digital.
Stan's group always designed the look of the character. We took his designs and would rebuild them in the computer and do the performances.
We had the actor Robert Patrick come up, and we had a 4-inch grid painted all over his body, and we shot him with 2 VistaVision cameras. There was no motion capture at that time. And from that, I was able to load it up on my computer, and I constructed a set of bones and data. So here we had walking bones, right? So it was my job then to actually build the physical data of Robert Patrick.
In Terminator 2, you see it, the effects are part of the character, you know, they're part of what you're specifically responding to. They're not, you know, a world beyond imagining. They're not, you know, you're not being blown away by the entire screen. You're being blown away by that element of the story that's being done incredibly well.
In this character and all his incarnations over the series of films, you've seen every possible technique for bringing him to life. In the first one, it was makeup and puppetry and stop motion animation. In the second one, CGI exploded on the scene, and tons of practical effects in that one as well. And the new ones continue to blend all those techniques. And, you know, honestly, when I look at a Terminator skull, I see the entire history of special effects.
We were sort of seen as this sort of funny little faction at ILM at that time because George Lucas had spent a tremendous amount of money on computer graphics, and then he just washed his hands of it, and he was looking, and he sold the company for $8 million to Steve Jobs.
After we sold Pixar, we came up at ILM with our own computer graphics division. And once we had control of the computer graphics division, that's when we really took off and did The Abyss and T2 and Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was a film that really sort of changed the way what people thought they could do with movies.
Dennis Muren took us all out to lunch one day, and he said, Steven Spielberg has this movie, and it's going to be stop motion, go motion, and Tippett Studio. Phil is going to do all this, all the work, and we're going to add motion blur to it.
At ILM, there was this little like rebel team that was going on. Mark DePay, Steve Williams, and a couple of other guys wanted to do CG dinosaurs.
I was working on a commercial with Mark DePay at the time, and then I snuck off and I found a scan-in of a T-Rex, and I started to build it in Data.
A couple of tests that were done. There was a test of a Tyrannosaurus that they built on quietly and secretly, and we did a test with a lot of gallimimuses running along also. And it worked so well that we showed that to Steven, and he just said, "This is great, you know, can you guys do it?" And I said, yes, we figured out we could do it in the time frame. He said, let's do it that way then. So we went ahead and that changed it. And Phil said, you know, hey, I'm extinct.
Yeah, at that particular time, it was you know, not a surprise, but I was shocked. If you could imagine having both of those, you know, kind of, you know, thoughts and emotions going on. It was a little bit of a limbo land in that, you know, my whole world just kind of disappeared. Everything that I was interested in that had mainly to do with actually, you know, hands-on, you know, making things and figuring out how they should work was now all done magically in a black box, and I had no relationship to that. And so, you know, I felt very alienated. You know, it was like there's a new world, and I don't particularly care to participate in that. And I hadn't put it all together. I got very depressed, and I got very sick. I was emotionally devastated when this whole thing happened, and I got pneumonia. I was told to go to bed for 2 weeks. It was just like, oh well, you know, now what am I?
I didn't mean it.
Now what am I going to do? And it was pretty much between like Dennis and my wife Jules trying to figure out a way of keeping us engaged.
You know, it needed him to be on the show because he knew more about dinosaurs than anybody and knew about filmmaking and storytelling that was critical to this. And I needed their stop-motion animators, Tom Sanamon and Randy Dutra, to be able to do animation in case our guys couldn't quite do it. We came up with the idea of building a dinosaur model that had encoders on it that you could animate stop motion and feed those motions into a computer. And that's what Phil's group did.
This thing is a stop-motion armature that was engineered by Craig Hayes and built by Tom Sanamon. It's basically a series of hinges that have these little potentiometers on them. So whenever you move this thing, it sends an electrical signal of that axis down this umbilicus, and that plugs into a thing, that plugs into a thing, that plugs into a thing, that plugs into a monitor. And so when you move the Tyrannosaur's head, the wireframe on the screen moves as well.
So we would get, and there was a satellite, you know, or a big satellite dish, right, that would basically project microwave images to ILM, and we would get this. Remember that? How crazy that was?
We only had a certain number of processors we could render stuff every night. So we had to get the show done all the time. We couldn't wait and do all the work at the end. So we were turning out final shots as the film was still being made. And the more we got into doing these shots, the closer we could get on these dinosaurs, and they would still look real.
I was excited to see the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park looking so great, but I was even more excited by the camera moves. It freed up Spielberg's camera, and you could run backwards with this thing as this thing was pursuing you. You suddenly were not restricted to the lockdown camera of the old photochemical days.
Before that, when you would superimpose, even, you know, Ray Harryhausen, very often it looked like the monster was like in front of the actors were going, ah! flat like this, but they're, you know, it just didn't have the real, or it'd have a blue line around it, or Jurassic Park was the first time I saw that the creatures were in the picture in a way that was new.
And in the rain.
Yeah,
Pretty
amazing, amazing.
But I still happen to think that a combination of CGI and actual animatronics and puppetry is really the best way to go, because the actors really benefit from having something to react to.
Part of the success of Jurassic Park and the way Jurassic Park felt had a lot to do with Stan Winston's studio. And I think if it was just ILM, and not the ILM Creature Shop, just ILM Computer Graphics, the feeling of Jurassic Park, at least back then, wouldn't have had the same texture. You know, there were actors on the set touching dinosaurs, and I think that was critical.
Making the full-size Rex was like a bit like building the Statue of Liberty. I don't remember how much clay went on top of that. I mean, tons of clay. I think Steven Spielberg had faith in Stan and all of us to do that because of the work we'd done in Aliens. The Queen alien was big. T-Rex was much bigger, 36 feet long, stood 18 feet tall. Had to actually raise the roof in the studio to make room for that T-Rex.
It's all for you, Steven.
I feel bad for actors. It's all green screens these days, especially even sets. Now they're just building the floor of the set, and where's the fun in that?
Well, that's right. You were trained as an actor.
Yeah.
But how do you get into the environment, into the character, if you just got a lot of green around you?
That's right. That's right. You go onto a set and you see it, and the smoke is being pumped in, and there's a creature, and no acting required. I remember being on Jurassic Park sets with my father. Those are the earliest memories of my life, were seeing these characters come to life. My greatest experience was with the dinosaurs, the T-Rex on Jurassic Park.
We brought in new people and people involved from theme park industry. We built these great puppeteering rigs that we could move by hand. Like you could put that physical body language into making it move by manipulating it. I was actually one of the raptors in the suit. There's the famous shot where it comes into the kitchen and stops and looks up and hoots. So that's actually me in the suit doing this. When Jurassic Park came out, because the new kid on the block was all the CG effects, that got all the attention.
Dan starts to feel like he's losing out because he felt like they were his dinosaurs. Well, of course, ILM felt like it was their dinosaurs. Interestingly enough, the press felt like it was ILM's dinosaurs, and Stan was devastated.
I remember distinctly my father having two reactions when Jurassic Park was released and the digital work got more attention than his insanely pioneering animatronics work. The first reaction was to make more noise about the animatronics. He went on every news show. The second reaction he had was to invest in digital technology. And he went out and he bought tons of workstations, and he realized that yes, the press was focusing on CGI, but the fact was, here was an incredible new tool for creating characters. And rather than hang his head, he bought in and eventually co-founded with James Cameron and Scott Ross, Digital Domain. So maybe for a moment he took it in the gut, but then he said, okay, great, adapt or die.
Digital revolution in film was very quick. It was a very quick one and very complete. Everybody went over to it as quickly as they could afford to do it.
There were a lot of makeup effects companies that didn't survive that transition.
I think Jurassic Park was just coming out when I decided to close the shop. And so there was a shift for the kind of work that was being done. There was still a lot of the rubber stuff going on, but of course, you know Hollywood, they see a change. If something new is successful, then everybody jumps on that one.
And there's also kind of this tendency for when things change for the new kids on the block to like diminish what you do. It's like the gunslinger thing, right?
By opening the digital revolution and opening those floodgates, that meant that movies that people couldn't figure out how to do 5 years ago were now getting made. Now, I'm an old school guy and I'm a purist, and if anybody touches 2001, I will fucking kill them. If anybody touches Jaws, I would kill them. If anybody went back to those movies and said, oh, well, now we have the technology and we could probably fix the shark and make the shark look like a real shark. No. However, utilizing that tool created a boom in the genre filmmaking in the late 90s.
The only reason Starship Troopers got made was because of CGI and because our friend Phil Tippett had worked on Jurassic Park. And when Jurassic Park came out, that was the end of everything that was before and the promise of all these things to come. So on Starship Troopers, we had two different groups doing the bugs. We had Phil Tippett doing the digital stuff, CGI. And the full-size props were made by ADI, by Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff.
Digital and practical effects not only can live together, but have very successfully. I think that Jurassic Park and Starship Troopers are the two classic examples of where the techniques are used to their strengths. If we're called upon in Starship Troopers, for instance, to create an army of 100,000 bugs climbing over the landscape in an attack, we're not going to say that we can do that. But if you want to have a bug that is going to be used in close-up and is going to, in a tactile way, be touched, you can get so much value out of those shots.
We had half a giant brain bug, and it was 12 feet tall. And then we had a full mechanical warrior, which was amazing to look at. And we had a half mechanical warrior for shots where they had to interface with actors. When I wrote it originally, I just thought, well, it should be about, it should be taller than a man. I knew that it was going to be, a bug, so I thought it had 6 legs. I think this design of the giant running jaw has got to be attributed mostly to Phil Tippett, because it's just, that's such a Phil idea.
Practical effects tend to have a rough edge on them somewhere, especially if you're talking about creature work, because you're talking about something that has a lot of operators, got a lot of stuff going on inside of it. So you'll get that magic moment and then a tentacle will click.
Chris, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And now CGI can fix that. CGI can augment the existing stuff.
You could have this really cool puppet that you build, and you have 3 guys in green suits in the shot, and then you film it, and then in post, they erase the puppeteers.
When I reflect on The Frighteners, it's with a little bit of sadness, because for me, being a physical effects guy, it was the first time I really became cognizant of the fact that things were changing, and they were changing dramatically, and they were going to change forever. Digital effects had arrived, CGI, and you have to embrace it. But it's hard at some level.
By the time we got to Small Soldiers, the idea originally was that Stan Winston was going to create these soldiers and these Gorgonites, these other misfit monsters, and they were all toys, and they would be largely puppets, and ILM would help out wherever they could.
Oh, that's great.
Stick. Open up a big can of whoop-ass on you.
But in practice, what happened was that we discovered that it was very, very time-consuming to try to manipulate the puppets on the set.
Walk them around, Alan. Keep them alive. Keep them alive.
There was almost no way to operate them without having to see the puppeteer. So I would say probably 60 to 70% of the movie is CGI.
It's very, very critical that we never look at CGI and practical effects as being at odds. They're literally just different approaches to creating a character, and the smart thing to do is use this what it's best for, use this what it's best for, mix them all up, and you leave your audience guessing how it was done.
People always try to kind of, they think that the rubber guys are against the computer guys, and that, I'm not, I'm all for the technology, and any way that we can achieve an effect that you can't achieve something that I can do with rubber, it's great. Any trick in your bag of tricks to fool people. What I don't like is when it's used improperly. In Men in Black, we built two giant Edgar bug animatronics. I kept saying, this doesn't look bug-like enough to me. The design that they finally chose, and it was kind of a design by committee film, many people involved in that. I kept saying, it doesn't look enough like a bug. The day came, we were on the set, we had our Edgar bug out and everything else, and all set up. And then that's when they broke the news to me. They go, you know what, we're not going to film this. We're going to do it all later as CG because it doesn't look enough like a bug. So I was like, okay. And unfortunately, and it happens, in films all the time now, especially.
Yes, that happens more and more these days.
We had a terrible experience when we were working on the prequel of The Thing because the plan at the time of starting was that it was going to be, 80% practical, 20% digital, and we love that. We love the hybrid feeling of using digital as a tool. But somehow during the course of post-production, at least we actually shot everything that we had built. Even though there was sort of a sense that we were starting to slip and that we felt at times, I don't know if you noticed it at times, but I felt like at times it didn't seem like the stuff we were shooting was really going to end up being used or being used properly. And having heard horror stories of big guys like Rick Baker and Men in Black, that whole thing where he had an animatronic that wasn't even used, at least we got our stuff on film. But that was the last anybody ever saw of it. If we didn't have video of our effects, it would be impossible to be able to even prove that we had worked on that set.
With the advent of CGI, what started happening is that impatient producers who didn't want to wait to get that perfect take on set would be, counseled by their VFX person, oh, we'll just replace it in CGI. That started happening. And it sort of threw out 100 years of movie making, which is on set, you work it till it works. A great example of a character that suffered from a practical effects to CGI switch in how he was executed is Yoda, in my opinion. The Yoda from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi is a simple hand puppet at its core, operated by a puppeteer, brilliant Frank Oz, and designed by Stuart Freeborn.
There was only one way to really do it, and they did a great job on the original Star Wars movies, with a great puppeteer and a great sculpt of it, and did whatever it took to get it,
It was limited in what it could do, but that forced the filmmakers to be creative and focus on the essence of the character.
Phantom Menace was George Lucas' return to the Star Wars series, and he had been waiting around for some way to do stuff that he couldn't do before. And CG is what gave him the chance to have the Yoda fight,
When they were able to execute him in CGI, yes, he could do more. He could bounce all around Christopher Lee's head. But I feel he lost a sense of reality, of texture, of being there.
We hoped that it wouldn't be seen as some kind of slight to the puppeteer's art.
or some kind of indication that we thought suddenly we were better than puppeteers. I think we just felt that with the tools we had in our hands at the time, that was the best way for us to do Yoda in the film.
When we saw that, we were thinking, oh, this looks silly, Yoda's flying around and everything. And some people might think that, but boy, the audience loved it. George just saw something in there that the 8-year-old wanted to see, and those films, I think, were made for around that age group, 8, 12 years old, something like that. And you couldn't do that at all any other way. And most of the directors now want that, if they had a choice, they want to be able to have the character be a full acting creature and not something that has got a restriction on it.
You try and get a puppet to walk across a room, pick up a telephone, put it to their ear and answer it. It's just impossible in a single take. You have to cut it into pieces. And arguably one of the great blessings of CG today is that it gives you that fluidity of performance where the digital character can go and do anything.
So, of course, every technique has its limitations. Animatronics have limitations. One of the most difficult animatronics jobs I was ever tasked with was the Doc Ock character for Spider-Man 2. The guy is tied to 28 people puppeteering him with an overhead rig. Sam Raimi looks at it. He doesn't really pay a lot of attention. He steps behind the curtain. He goes, okay, now here's what I want Doc Ock to do. In this shot, I want him to crash into the telephone pole, throw one door open with his upper right tentacle. Another cop car is going to come in this way. It's going to crash into the bank window. I want Doc Ock to reach his tentacle over there, rip the hood off of the guy's car, toss it, and then I want him to lean back casually on a lamppost, retrieve a cigar from his coat pocket with one tentacle, put it in his mouth, light it, and lean back in triumph. I'm like, Sam, you do realize these aren't real tentacles, right? These are puppets. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, okay, well, just tell me what I can do. And I said, well, let's break it down into shots. And Sammy said, okay. Which brings us back to the shark from Jaws. It didn't work. 9/10 of the time, it didn't work.
But that's not their fault. It's just like trying to blend mechanics, water, 1974, 75. So Spielberg had not enough footage to create, the effects he wanted. Instead, he was like, well, let's suggest the shark by being POV in the water with the camera. He kept you waiting for so long. He kept you so tense about this shark that when he shows it, even in 1975, it looks ridiculously rubber, everybody's like, that's a shark.
Can you imagine Jaws? If you could have seen a digital shark, it wouldn't be nearly as scary.
To me, a shark will always look like Jaws. A shark has giant black eyes and his mouth is usually open. He can jump on boats. So, that was a rubber effect that was so powerful. It still defines me today.
There's a certain flavor that goes with each style of effect, and you have to know what flavor your movie is.
We let the character define the technique, not the technique define the character. We define the character, learn what the character needs to do, what the producers, the directors want to accomplish, and then we figure out the best way to do it. Is it a puppet? Is it stop motion animation? Is it CG? Sometimes it is. We prefer it wouldn't be, but sometimes it is.
The job of creating a creature in CGI is similar in some ways to what it's always been. You've got to build the creature. We have modelers who do that digitally. You've got to put controls into it so you can move it, just like a puppeteer would with a puppet or an armature and a stop-motion puppet, so that the animators can get at it and pose it.
In stop motion, you have a wire armature, and that's the skeleton. And in CG, you have the same exact thing. You have a skeleton with joints, and that's what we call rigging. These joints are where the character can bend, so you need them in places like the finger joints, anywhere where it's going to move and it's going to articulate. The way we place joints is based on anatomy. One of the things you're thinking about is how simple can I make the rig, what's intuitive, what is an animator going to want to work with, and you try and make those controls as simple as possible.
And then the job of the animator is very much what it's always been. It's, you know, sort of imagining the performance, doing it yourself in front of a mirror or a video camera, really living it.
You know, it's really enjoyable because that's the step where we're bringing the character to life, of course. And you get to a certain point where it stops being movement on screen and it becomes life.
Welcome to dinner. People say computer animation as if you put an order into the computer. Give me 5 shots of a monster attacking a city. And they come out. But in reality, it's animation. Nobody calls painting brush painting. Painting is painting. Monet, Manet, Degas, Picasso, Renoir, doesn't matter. They are all using brushes. Nobody says brush painting. Same thing with animation. I think that you cannot say, oh, it's computer. No, it's not computer, it's human.
Spontaneity is definitely one of the biggest challenges because it's a highly iterative process where you are creating an animation, looking at it, tweaking it, playing it back, tweaking it, playing it back. So it's almost counterintuitive. You have to consciously include things that look like accidents or feel like spontaneous events.
I think it's really hard nowadays to make a CG creature look like it's one thing with its own personality and attitude because you have so many people that have to work on it. You know, you've got people maybe that just do the face and other people that do the bodies. You know, and one of the ways to get this done quickly is to use motion capture or shoot people going through the performance. Then you've got, you know, hopefully a good actor who's acting it out, and everybody follows that.
With Peter Jackson, we got a chance to do that when we created Gollum for the Two Towers, because that was the first time that we had to create a character in close-up that had to act with other human characters. It was brilliant that Andy Serkis was on board, first to do the voice of Gollum, but then actually, as it turns out, to create his performance.
The motion capture that we had couldn't do fingers, couldn't do facial. It was just rudimentary body movement and pretty crude at that. It was always interpretation of the dialogue through the animator's skill.
So we tried another technique to capture the face for King Kong.
D'ailleurs, ça rejoint des hypothèses de science-fiction, c'est-à-dire que l'homme pourrait à un moment devenir le noyau d'une créature plus grosse que lui, plus forte que lui, plus puissante que lui. Dans la culture japonaise, ça a donné lieu au mecha. Et d'une certaine manière, d'une manière concrète, dans la technologie d'aujourd'hui, ça donne lieu à Andrew Serkis, petit homme, qui est le noyau au cœur de cette créature de synthèse qu'est King Kong.
There seems to be a rather open debate about performance capture. Who is most responsible? Is it the performer, the person who's wearing the digital pajamas who will later become something? Or is it the artist who is going to sit there and paint digital hairs on this dude until he looks like an ape? You know, and that's like, it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. They are dependent on one another. But unless you've got a team of artists who are like, I'm turning this into this is going to look more simian, then it's just Andy Serkis jumping around on set.
When it came time to do Avatar, Jim Cameron extended it with the idea of putting a head rig with a camera in front of the actor's face so that they can be completely mobile and move all over the stage. And at that point, because we were dealing with the totality of the performance, Jim started calling it performance capture.
You're ready.
One of the real advantages of working with performance capture is that you can have actors creating characters that in the past would have been physically impossible. And I think if you look at the Planet of the Apes series, that's a good example. In the original series, you had these fantastic makeup effects, but it was of its time. The actors can be as expressive as they want. Some of that subtlety of motion is necessarily going to get lost because prosthetics are passive devices.
This is one of the original prosthetic makeups done by John Chambers for the original Planet of the Apes films. It really was fairly simple. It's just 2 pieces, the eyebrow and the cheeks and the nose and upper muzzle, and then the bottom part of the muzzle, and it was just applied with spirit gum at the time, was the adhesive, and they would blend in the edges and put on the hair and the wigs. I mean, it took about 2.5 or 3 hours every day.
Roddy McDowall had to go play Cornelius, and he's buried in rubber. And that was one of the most human performances you'll ever see. He humanized the chimpanzee so much so that I said to my parents, can we get one? And they're like, don't you see what will happen? But I didn't care. Cornelius would be my friend.
Rick Baker's approach in the 2001 remake, directed by Tim Burton, was to try and give the makeups more expression, more facial movement than the original makeups had. And of course, with the original prosthetics, that was all a lot of rubber that didn't have a lot of movement. So Rick's approach was to do a much thinner mouth area and then do the dimensionality of it to poke it out with the teeth that the actors wore.
Tim Burton's version of Planet of the Apes, nobody liked it, but he stuck with the rubber makeup, man, and it still worked, and that was not that long ago.
Now the ape characters are being done with motion capture and CGI, and it's taken it to a whole new level.
Apes! For human-scale creatures like Gollum and the apes on Planet of the Apes and all the Andy Serkis scale creatures, that's a very valuable tool. Peter Jackson knows how to use it, Andy Serkis knows how to use it, but I myself find that if you're working at a larger scale, you may want to do frame animation. You know, when I'm directing the monsters on Pacific Rim with ILM, I can direct the animation. When you go to scales like that, for example, it's very hard for me to believe that an actor is going to translate the weight of a 25-story high monster.
The way digital effects are being used now, it sort of brings new hope to fantasy characters that will be coming our way on movie screens for years to come. But filmmakers just need to be careful to use it judiciously and to use it wisely and use it first and foremost to tell a story.
What's happened now is now we are so used to seeing miraculous things that we don't care anymore. Rick Baker and I went to see one of the Underworld movies. And, you know, Rick turned to me and he said, you know, just because you can have 100 werewolves running across the ceiling doesn't mean you should.
Here's an example, like Tibbet Studio worked on Cloverfield, okay? There's an example of what should be done with computer graphics, which is that you don't show the whole creature, you show bits of the creature, right? That was very responsible.
It was responsible because it was a $25 million show and they didn't have any money.
You know what? Yeah, but guess what? It worked.
Yeah.
It totally worked.
I think people have lost a lot of the sense of wonder, because even my daughters that know the difference between this and that, they always say, oh, that's computer. And it's not. I remember the wings on the Angel of Death of Hellboy 2, which we did physically, and it's one of the most complex rigs we've ever made. We rigged all those eyes to really blink in sequence. We did feathers one by one with garbage bags and wire, and people saw those wings and they say, oh, it's computer, and it wasn't.
We have had a revolution in animatronics that has been overshadowed by the digital revolution. What we see personally is a revolution in skin materials. We see many, many more different types of silicones, for instance, that we have a lot more options than we did, say, back in the 80s. We have smaller motors that are now lighter weight, yet more powerful. Digital motors, you know, as opposed to the ratchety kind of analog motors we used to have.
The other really cool breakthrough that we've achieved is phoneme recognition, lip sync capable puppetry. So you talk into a microphone, it recognizes the phonemes in your voice, it sends digital signals to the servo packs, and that creates pretty accurate lip sync, including tongue articulation.
We have begun to explore areas that we've never tapped into before. Advanced robotics, facial recognition technology.
You know, what's happened over time is they still demand that the excellence be there, top notch. But what's happened is budgets get shrunken, time frames get shrunken, so we've tried to figure out, you know, how can we still build excellent creatures or robots or suits or whatever it may be? How can we enhance that process within the time frame?
Our build schedules are getting so short now, so amazingly short, and we keep doing it. We keep doing it, and then the reward is to make it shorter the next time. So, I mean, it's got to reach at some point where you can only squeeze so much and still get the quality.
For me, the problem with that wasn't about losing the money so much or the work. It was about losing the respect. We literally, in the 80s, early 90s, all the way into the mid-90s, people like me, Bottin, Rick Baker, all of us, we're almost like rock stars.
The people responsible for these effects attained this kind of cult status, you know? I mean, Tom Savini and Stan Winston and Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, these guys all became celebrities.
You didn't really hear too much about makeup artists until this started happening, and then you knew their names. These names, you know, are synonymous with movie monsters, movie makeup, movie magic and stuff.
It was a big deal. We got so much attention, but the best part was we got respect from the film industry. Producers and directors would come to a certain artist because they liked their style.
It was a time when you would go to a Rick Baker, a Stan Winston, or a Dick Smith, and you would say, what do you think? You're the artist. Please give us your vision. And in that respect, it was much more pure, which is why I think people respond to those movies from the 80s and into the 90s, because you felt like you were watching an artist's vision rather than a corporation's vision.
We just got lucky. We kind of happened to be at the right place at the right time. It was the entire process of creating imaginary worlds, you know, that are populated by, you know, demons and gods and, you know, strange things. That was fascinating, and we just got really lucky and were able to earn a living doing it.
We got to live through the golden age of what we do, and we got to see it come, and we've seen it go.
For example, I mean, Rob Bottin left the industry for the very same reason, lack of respect. I mean, he was at the top of coming up with outrageous concepts and things nobody had ever seen. And look what happened to him. He's become an enigma.
The 80s were the high watermark for practical effects guys. There are people that refer to that time period fondly as the days when we were rock stars. And I think what that meant is, like, people on the outside just assumed that we could do anything and we got paid everything and we held all the cards, right? And from being in the inside, it wasn't really so much that, but it definitely changed. No matter how big you thought we were back in the 80s, it definitely changed once we hit the 90s.
You know, slowly it kind of, the artisans, the makeup masters went away, and now, of course, they've been replaced by animators. And that's the important thing I think we got to work against now. Need to be more people jumping into prosthetics again. Because you don't want that to be a throwback. It's time, man. It's very important that younger generation picks it up and keeps going forward with it.
It's critical that we do this because, number one, the more we share, the more we ensure the future of this industry and this craft we all love so much. And number two, the only way to innovate is to build upon a foundation of knowledge.
I can see through my teaching that there's a young audience out there who want to learn some of the old practical effects techniques. Because remember, these young people were brought up on the films of the 80s, and they have a soft spot for rubber, stop motion, and makeup effects. They like the tangible quality of this technique.
We're often asked, you know, as creature designers, what's your lifestyle like? Like, how did you get into this? You know, what drives a person to become this, and what exactly are you? You know, you're not like an accountant or a banker and I say, yeah, we're not normal people. Like, we grew up as weird kids reading comic books and watching monster movies, and I think in terms of the way you carry that with you, it does affect your daily life.
So it is not a business per se. It's, from my perspective, more of a lifestyle.
The Frankenstein Complex is a very strange thing because, let's face it, this is a strange job. The art has grown like wildflowers. People are doing this stuff just simply for the love of doing it.
It's an addiction. It is simply an addiction that you take from your cradle to your grave.
It's important to keep that kid spirit alive in you, because that's what got you into it in the first place. And it's very easy in the business to get that, you know, taken away when you get into the reality of deadlines and finances, and learning to keep that kid feeling alive is a job.
You have to see the world through childlike eyes. The childlike aspect of wonder.
When I was a child, I loved playing with army men and dinosaurs. And then filmmaking came into my mind because I could then make this play come alive and show it to other people. And you've got to tap into that kind of childhood creativity in order to really be viable in this industry.
When you are an adult in this craft, you're basically a kid that grew up and is now playing with his favorite band. So you need to get excited that you are, with Lennon and McCartney, you're part of the monster world, and now you're creating those monsters. And I tell you, the happiest I can be is when the monster walks into the set, and I feel for a moment my life is complete.